Pour yourself a cold one.
Let's drink 'em, huh?
And listen to Ross Tucker break down the top college prospects on another tasty edition of The College Draft.
Adding soda time here on the College Draft Podcast, which is presented today by fantasypoints.com. You guys know the deal if you've been hearing me talk about it. Use the code FEAST, all caps, if you want to go against me and Joe Dolan in the next best ball draft that we will have. I will destroy you. I am a best ball expert, I must tell you, even though my co-host, Matt Waldman, is pretty darn good himself when it comes to fantasy football. But again, fantasypoints.com, just use that code FEAST, all caps. This is sort of our maiden voyage. This is the first full podcast that we are recording video and audio, and that will be posted to YouTube. We'll be all over social media at Ross Tucker NFL, at Ross Tucker Pod, going ahead and posting our YouTube links. You guys can subscribe if you want to watch as well. And what's especially cool about this for me, this is my first time ever actually seeing Matt Waldman on the College Draft Podcast. Matt, what's up, man?
Hey, man. Everything's good. It's a nice Monday morning, pretty day, get a chance to see your mug, and we're going to get to go.
It's funny, Matt, because I'm just being honest here. I usually, I have my notes in front of me. I'm usually looking down at my notes while I do podcasts. I'm not usually looking into a camera. So hopefully you guys won't mind if from time to time I'm looking down at my notes to look at the next thing we're going to talk about. But everybody said you got to have a YouTube page. You got to have a YouTube page. Well, now we do. And it'll be great because we'll be able to post a lot of stuff to social media. A lot of people like watching. They don't want to just listen. They want to watch as well. So you will have that option if you so choose. Matt, of course, is the owner, CEO, ruler of the rookie scouting portfolio. You can and should go to mattwaldmanrsp.com. I'm telling you, scouts, teams, GMs, get this guide. You should as well. It's over 1,200 pages. Matt clearly has no life. We know that. We've established that. You can check him out on Twitter at Matt Waldman, like I do. Again, mattwaldmanrsp.com. And Matt, we're changing things up. Next week, we're going to dive a little bit into something really unique where we talk about verified numbers and tracking football, if you will, the correlation for scouting purposes from track to the NFL. I got a great guest, Brian Spillbeller from Tracking Football is going to join us. But today we are finishing up our draft series. It's been a while, Matt. It's been 2 months. We've done every single team by division. Today we have certainly last but not least, the NFC East, which I think you look at all the numbers, Matt, still by far the most popular division in the NFL when you just think about the popularity of all those teams.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't go anywhere without seeing, Cowboys fans, Eagles fans are some of the most rabid fan base that you're going to see in the NFL. And certainly you have, huge Giants and Washington fans that are just, excellent. So, this is a storied division, and, a lot of great teams have come out of there over the years to win championships. So, and it's a compelling division once again this year.
Absolutely. We talked about it on this morning's Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It looks as if Dak Prescott's going to sign his franchise tender to go ahead and be with the Cowboys for at least this year. They still have that July 15th deadline looming. We've talked a lot already about CeeDee Lamb when we reviewed the first round, Matt. So let's dive into the rest of their picks. I thought they had a really good draft overall. Second round, Trayvon Diggs. Third round, the Alabama corner. Third round, Neville Gallimore, the D tackle from Oklahoma.
Yeah, and Diggs, he's a skilled cover corner, and he's someone that also does pretty well with the jam as a press coverage guy. But he's going to have to learn to temper his aggression a little bit. When he's playing tight man-to-man, he can get a little over-aggressive, and as a result, if someone beats him, he can get beaten pretty badly when he's a little too aggressive. But, he's someone that I think that in terms of overall will be best in zone, but there's if he gets that work in as an aggressive cover corner, I think that he can help out in man-to-man, but his pass tracking is a little bit of a concern when he's working with his back to the football. And he's a decent tackler, not a guy that necessarily runs through his man when he tackles. He's more of a guy that drags opponents to the ground. But overall, there's some skills to work with him. And then with Gallimore, I mean, listen, we've talked about this guy before. He, 6'2", 305, pound guy with some real pass rushing ability as a defensive tackle. Especially in a 4-3, great short area acceleration and change of direction quickness, and he moves his legs and feet well. Combine this with his pad level, his anticipation and vision, and he can get skinny, kind of in the way like a running back gets skinny into a hole and find his way through traffic. But he's a guy that, against double teams, which is really the big key for a lot of defensive tackles, you'd expect him to be a little bit better, maybe when it comes to anticipating snaps, playing with good leverage. The power isn't quite there in his game at this point. He tends to play ahead of himself, looking into the backfield and giving up his frame rather than really establishing that leverage first. He has good upper body leverage, so he can torque opponents to the side, take that half man, and then lock his hands onto the ball carrier. But there's some questions about his stamina, about his ability to hold up in the fourth quarter. He's not a lazy guy by any stretch of the imagination. But when you see him fresh and he's not beaten down by double teams, you see him work hard, you see that high effort. But it just seems like he wears out. So conditioning, getting a little bit stronger, these are going to be priorities for Gallimore.
2 fourth-round picks, Matt. Reggie Robinson, the corner from Tulsa, and I thought was a really good pick and an interesting one. Tyler Biadasz, the center from Wisconsin, in the 4th round. He's a guy that people thought a year ago, after his, I guess maybe it was his redshirt freshman year, redshirt sophomore year, that if he had gone pro, he might have been the top center, might have gone 1st or 2nd round. He went back to Wisconsin for another year. He still had another year of eligibility. He still had another year after this, but he left after this year. I guess wasn't quite as good. Ends up going in the 4th round, but the Cowboys traded up to get him with Travis Frederick, another Wisconsin center, retiring. They wanted to have at least one more option in there with guys like Joe Looney and Connor McGovern.
Yeah, and it's a great pick when you think about what he could be, because one of the issues with his game, or maybe his draft status, is that he had a hip injury, and it was one of those things where when they look at his tape after the hip injury, you just didn't see necessarily the balance and strength that he had on tape prior to that injury. So maybe they're hoping that they've seen enough with him, or feel like that looking at that hip, that explains more of what happened with him post, in terms of his tape post injury, and that they feel like he can regain that balance and strength to a level that it looked like he had. And if that's the case, you're looking at a Remington Award winner who, is a very good man and gap blocker. So for, counter plays and, duo and power, he's very good at those types of blocks. He has great grip strength. He has an excellent anchor, and his pad level, really more than anything, sometimes gets a little high as the plays progress, and when he's fighting to win an interaction where he's being challenged a little bit more, you can see him, get his pads a little too high, maybe lose his base at certain times where he's not as grounded or as balanced as he needs to be. But this is a guy that I think that if the Cowboys were confident in his medicals and feel like that, this isn't going to be a long-term issue for him in terms of balance and strength, then they got themselves a terrific value. And the Cowboys tend to gamble a little bit more sometimes on certain things in terms of maybe certain things off the field. They feel like they're a little bit more prepared to be able to handle, or they're a little bit easier in terms of looking at those issues and feel like that they have a good program in place. And certainly, they look at Biadasz and he certainly looks like the type of guy that, they hit on him and it's a big hit. And then when it comes to Robinson, this kid at Tulsa, 6'1", 205 pounds, 4.4 speed. He has some skill to work inside against tight ends and running backs in the receiving game. And there's some press coverage ability against receivers. He's probably going to be better off in the slot, though. I think that he has some issues being able to mirror routes of wide receivers in terms of that quickness and fluidity. And he can be a little bit too handsy in terms of being able to grabbing guys and trying to play with them at a point where he's just a little bit too physical with his hands at the wrong points. But, decent slot player. And then Biadasz, certainly a, fine prospect.
Then let's get to their last two picks. Two guys I still find interesting. Bradley Anae, who was a sack machine at Utah. They got him in the 5th round. And then Ben DiNucci, this makes me feel old, the quarterback from JMU in the 7th round. I actually called Ben's state championship game. I want to say it was like 2014, maybe 2015, for Pine Richland High School against John Reed, DeAndre Swift, John Runyon, and St. Joe's Prep. He had an unbelievable game, by the way. Went to Pitt, ended up transferring to JMU, gets them in the national championship game where they lost to North Dakota State, because that's what you do when you get to the FCS national championship game. What do you got, Matt?
Yeah, this is a guy with a decent arm. He buys time pretty well in the pocket, which is a really nice asset to have in terms of, making he has kind of quiet feet in terms of being able to move and keep his eyes downfield to look for that next receiver in his progression. He has, he's creative in terms of in and outside the pocket. I think he can play a little too much of what you would call hero ball, and it's common for a lot of quarterbacks who can create, where maybe he hangs on a little too long, he hangs on the ball a little bit too long, or tries to target players in tighter coverage that he shouldn't, because of the fact that he's gotten too invested into the outcome of the play and not just throwing the ball away to live for another day. So he's going to have to just prove that he can make the decisions pre and post snap with the speed and accuracy that many NFL quarterbacks do. And that's a simple way, of kind of saying where most quarterbacks have to go is, general decision making as being a field general, and then also being able to see and process information quickly. But this is a guy that has a real potential to become a good backup in the NFL, and maybe even a little bit more, maybe a journeyman guy who teams would feel comfortable starting, for a year, maybe 2, or, and feeling like that they can have someone carry them as they develop somebody behind them. And then with Anae, listen, this is a guy who often is sudden off the line, can flatten out. I think he has some nice push-pull moves, arm overs, good rips, strong inside spin. So he uses his hands well and violently. I think there's some bend, to get around the edge. Would like to see a little bit more flexion in the knees and ankles from him. And he doesn't really anchor against blocks as well as I'd like to see, especially on zone runs. And but he's good at sniffing out gap runs, taking on the puller early. Maybe not so good at diagnosing screens. Basically, it seems like in the power game, you see a lot going on there. Maybe on plays that are a little bit, there's a little bit more options for the ball carrying decision making. That's where he has some issues there. He can leave his feet a little too early when closing on quarterbacks, and he gives his chest up a little early and gets washed inside or moved inside by edge blockers pretty easily, and difficulty with shedding blocks. But again, this is a guy that there's, I think that he has a great track record, and I think that there is some potential for him, to develop into a contributor in the league who's going to be on the field a good bit.
Let's move on, Matt, to the G-Men, the New York Giants. They had a bunch of picks. They, of course, took Andrew Thomas with the 4th overall pick, the Georgia left tackle. Then you get into the 2nd and 3rd rounds, day 2. They took Xavier McKinney, the safety from Alabama, and Matt Peart, the big offensive tackle from UConn. They got a couple offensive tackles in the first 3 rounds.
Yeah, and looking at McKinney, this is a guy he was the first safety drafted, this year, and he looks like a guy who's going to probably be that coverage safety next to Jalil Peppers in the lineup. So, this is a guy that does a pretty good job of being able to cover up the seams and be able to mirror and be able to run with guys and track the football and get a good jump on the ball. So, McKinney looks like a nice pick for them. And then with Peart, I mean, this is a guy that when you just look at the dimensions of his game, physically, he's got the height, the length, the overall the footwork that you're looking for. He really keeps his feet moving through his reps, and this is a guy that hasn't played a lot of tackle. So for a guy with less experience than what you normally see this early in terms of getting drafted, he's someone that plays with his feet, uses his feet pretty well. He's just going to have to develop a better punch in terms of the placement and timing so he can set the tone to the rep, control that rep early on, and get into a good anchoring type of position. But that anchor right now is a little bit of an issue. So is the strength. He needs to get stronger. But the fundamentals that he needs to work on in terms of punching, maintaining balance, if he can develop those, give him a year to develop that frame, learn some of the techniques. And this is a guy that could be an asset to the Giants in their zone game, especially when you consider that this is a guy that has learned a lot early and hasn't played a ton at that position. So, this is a team that's banking on him developing a lot, over a shorter period of time and feeling like that they have enough, they've seen enough on film to think that he can do it.
You get to the 4th and 5th round. Darnay Holmes, corner from UCLA. He's another guy that played in the U.S. Army Bowl, was a 5-star recruit. And then Shane Lemieux, the guard from Oregon. I watched him a couple times this year. I just like that he's mean. He's got some mean to him. I'm a big fan of mean. And I guess I read maybe where they might be looking at him to work in at center a little bit as well. But anyway, Darnay Holmes and Shane Lemieux, a couple of Pac-12 guys, Matt.
Yeah, these are some solid players, and that's the type of thing. And with Holmes, you get a really good tackling cornerback, which is not always the norm. And he's a fluid player in terms of his hip movement, ability to flip his hips and work with a receiver and run downfield. He recovers well in coverage, and he has return skills. This is the one real weakness with his game might be that he doesn't really track the ball well. So when it comes to some of those one-on-one matchups against maybe the most athletic receiver on the field, that's where he can be exposed a little bit, some of those fade routes or one-on-one type of looks, in the red zone. But overall is a guy that's going to be able to contribute on special teams as a returner, as well as maybe a guy more in coverage. And he gives you some real skills in terms of, being able to play the run and do some coverage. With Lemieux, listen, I mean, he's disciplined. I think he's a better run blocker than a pass protector right now, but that's true of a lot of guys coming into the league on the line. If there's anything that he's guilty of doing at times that's frequent on his tape is just overextending when he's a pass protector. But listen, he has the physical skills, the mental toughness to become an NFL starter. He may never be a dominant physical force, but he's a technically sound guy with a lot of smarts. And like you said, he does play with a mean streak and with intensity. And, you love guys like that when it comes to playing the game, because you need that. It's a tough game. You're playing hurt a lot, and you're playing the best, and you have to have an edge. And Lemieux certainly has that.
They had a lot of picks after that. Cam Brown, the linebacker from Penn State, in the 6th round. And then they had 4 7th-round picks. Carter Coughlin, another linebacker. TJ Brunson, another linebacker. Coughlin from Minnesota. TJ Brunson, South Carolina. Chris Williamson, a corner, also from Minnesota. And then another Georgia Bulldog, Tay Crowder, after that. I can speak to Cam Brown a little bit, Matt. Watched every snap he played at Penn State. I think a lot of these guys they took 6th and 7th round goes back to Joe Judge's background as a special teams coordinator. I think he really wanted some guys with some traits. Cam Brown's all of 6'5". Never really was able to put that much weight on at Penn State, about 225. Very long, runs well, great kid. I don't think he ever quite became the player that maybe they hoped he would be. I think his instincts as a linebacker are just average, but he has unique physical traits for special teams. And when he was a freshman, I think he blocked a couple punts, Matt, and he made a bunch of plays on special teams. You don't see bodies like that. 6'5", 225 can really run on special teams. So I think that's where he'll really have to make his way and then maybe eventually, earn some time. I know he's a smart guy and can play multiple positions. Maybe earn time, but I got to think that pick was a lot to do with his special teams value.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Ross. And at this stage of the draft, I mean, you're really looking for guys who can contribute on special teams and deliver at that point. And if you get that, that's a success. You get more than that, long term, and that's a nice bonus. I mean, this, like you said, Brown's athletic, he's rangy, he can cover tight ends and runners, as well as chase and pursue. And that length is excellent, that great arm length, and he's a physical tackler. But at 225, 235 in that range, is he going to be right now immediately going to show you enough strength and technique to keep bodies off him? So right now, yeah, special teams, terrific. Long term, that strength is probably going to be the thing that they want to see him be able to add a little bit muscle to his frame. And then with Coughlin, I mean, this is a disruptive guy in the box for Minnesota. Who has a really strong motor, reads plays, isn't really fooled a lot. I think he found his way into the backfield a great deal for Minnesota. But again, like Brown, in that 235 pound range, he doesn't have great length, though. He's more of a linebacker who's going to have to work on getting stronger to keep defenders off of him as well. And special teams obviously is probably going to be his first gig. And then with Brunson, he's also in that 230 range, and he blitzes well. He works effectively as a chase player too. He just has to be a little bit more disciplined and quicker with understanding the run keys and how they develop, so that he can anticipate a little bit better where he needs to be. And if he can learn to do this and maybe address some of the issues in terms of getting away from second level blocks by linemen, I think he could be a much better player. But the mental part of the game is going to be a little bit of a bigger concern, even with his size being in the same range of Brown and Coughlin. And then Williamson, listen, he could become a slot corner if he, with that sturdy frame he has good timing to break up passes. He just lacks some discipline with his technique as a tackler and doesn't have the feel for attacking routes at the right time. So, again, starts on special teams. You got a guy who can, because of that ability to tackle and that size for a corner, those are some pretty good assets as well, for the third phase of football. And then when you talk about Crowder, this is a good tackler who sniffs out plays well, but he's not the top athlete that maybe you'd see from like a Cam Brown. But he has average pursuit speed, change of direction. The quickness isn't really starter quality for the NFL. And he's going to, for him to be able to advance from being the special teamer to a contributor, he's going to have to develop that kind of preternatural diagnostic skill and ability to take angles to the ball that compensate for that athletic ability being average. And that's just not likely, because usually you either have those skills by the time you get to this level, and been playing a while like Crowder has, or you're new to the game and you're learning things very fast. And Crowder's more of a guy that's been there, done that, but the athletic skills, he's going to have to be more of an overachiever.
Before we get to the Philadelphia Eagles, Matt, I want to make sure everyone that likes to put a little something on sporting events knows that DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook app, is putting you in the center of the action with a sign-up bonus up to $1,000. Whoa! Don't worry if you weren't able to take advantage of last weekend's tournament. That action on the course continues, and DraftKings Sportsbook is the place to get all your bets in for this weekend's tournament. Download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code ROSS when you sign up. For a limited time, all new users can get a sign-up bonus up to $1,000. That's right. DraftKings Sportsbook is going all out with a sign-up bonus up to $1,000. Just enter code ROSS when you sign up, only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 or older. Colorado only. Bonus comprised of a first deposit bonus and a first bet match, each up to $500. Deposit bonus requires 25 times playthrough. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700. Matt, how much do you love disclaimer voice?
I actually was gonna comment on that. I was like, you do a pretty good disclaimer voice overall.
I've been working on my disclaimer voice, and I got to tell you, I'm pretty proud of my disclaimer voice. I'm not gonna lie. All right, so this is a team that I cover very closely. Up next, it's the Philadelphia Eagles. I am the television analyst for their preseason games, and I do their pregame show for their flagship radio station, WIP in Philadelphia. We've talked about Jalen Reagor in our first round recap, and the Eagles going with him over a guy like Justin Jefferson in the first round. In the second round, I think we might have already talked about this as well, but let's get to their second and third round picks. A couple of guys from the Midwest. Jalen Hurts, quarterback from Oklahoma, one of the real surprise picks of the draft. And then Davion Taylor in the third round from Colorado.
Yeah, and Hurts is an intriguing pick because when you look at Carson Wentz's game, I mean, certainly the Eagles have done a great job of molding his talents and maximizing them within their scheme. Early on in his career, even though he came from a West Coast system, he was a guy that, when you watched him in the first season and then part of the second season, having to use longer drops and do, throw off progressions in the deeper game areas of the game in terms of intermediate, vertical, and deep routes. His accuracy wasn't always great when he was forced to make longer drops. He has some issues with his footwork in that regard, where they just decided, maybe the best thing we can do is give him, quicker hitting plays, quicker drops, work him out a pistol, and he has the arm that he can use. He doesn't have to necessarily make those types of longer drops to deliver the ball 25, 30 yards downfield. And if he needs to buy time, he's great at that. But the issue with Wentz, even though his stats have really taken off in this type of a system and they've molded it well, is that when he has to buy that time, he's pretty reckless, and that's something that fans love because he puts his body on the line. But when you watch some of the plays where he's gotten hurt, you also see a guy who maybe his feet kind of get glued in positions that you wouldn't like to see. And that's always going to be an issue with him. So they look at a guy like Hurts, who has that mobility, who can buy time in the pocket, who has a really strong deep game, at Oklahoma. You saw a lot of that. And the big thing with him is that he can get a little over invested in plays the longer he buys time, and he's going to have to, unlearn that. A guy like Mitchell Trubisky really hasn't unlearned that for the Bears as well as he could. You'd like to see, but a number of players like maybe, Matthew Stafford's a good example of a guy who has steadily developed into a player who's a little wiser in the game, even though he'll still target into tight windows. But Hurts has some nice skills, both inside and outside the pocket, and he's a good runner. He reminds me a lot of David Garrard, the guy who played for the Jaguars, being drafted in the mid rounds and developing into a starter for them and even making a Pro Bowl. So Hurts is a guy that they feel like probably can fill in and fit well in what the Eagles do. And then with Taylor, I mean, look, he's a run and chase linebacker, very athletic. I think he's going to compete for the weak side linebacker job. He's just going to have to work on reading his keys and speeding up his processing ability. But he should help on special teams early. And I think as he develops more experience with coverage, he can become a good starting linebacker in the league.
Then we get to the fourth round, a pick I really liked. They took Kavon Wallace, the safety from Clemson, in the fourth round, as well as Jack Driscoll, versatile offensive lineman from Auburn, in the fourth round.
Yeah, Wallace is, two versatile guys. And Wallace is a guy who can blitz from the edge. He can cover as a nickel back. If you need him to work as a safety in the box, he can do that. As a linebacker, maybe covering running backs and tight ends. Very good there. He's disruptive as a tackler. He's going to work through the opposition to reach opponents, and he has some press coverage skill. He's just not really quick or fluid enough to be a coverage safety in the deeper ranges of the field. You're probably going to want him to cover the short and intermediate range, and then use him a little bit more at the line of scrimmage to blitz on plays, on certain packages. And I think he's a guy that you could see the Eagles wanting to use him in certain sub packages and roles where that versatility is really played up, like playing to his strengths, and then, and then not lean on things where his flaws are more apparent. So, there's going to be, with Wallace, you can see a little bit of a boom bust factor where if they get him in the right scheme or they have him in the right fit with certain coverages, he's going to play really well. And then opposing offenses are going to hope that they can do some things to kind of create matchups where there's a mismatch in their favor with Wallace. But overall, this is a really smart guy who does a lot of different things as a football player that I think the Eagles are going to be able to leverage. And then with Driscoll, look, he's technically sound. He has strong hand placement. He's got that mental acuity you're looking for to pick up all the different twists and stunts that you see, all the games that defenders play. And, his punch is something he's going to need to work on so he can develop a little bit more of an aggressive and physical style. But if he can develop that as well as his anchoring and his ability to push, he could become a tackle. And that was what he's done in the past. If not, maybe they ask him to compete at guard. But both are, two really smart players they picked at this stage of the draft.
After that, a lot of speed. They got John Hightower in the fifth round from Boise State, a wide receiver. Sean Bradley, a Temple linebacker in the sixth round. Quez Watkins, a Southern Miss receiver in the sixth round who can also fly.
Yeah, and it's funny. It doesn't seem like these days it's an Eagles draft unless later in the draft they pick some of these really skinny, really fast return specialist, deep threat guys. I mean, Shelton Gibson out of West Virginia is a good example of that in the past. They seem to be wanting to try and hit on some of these really terrific athletes who may be a little bit on the undersized level. John Hightower is kind of built like, you look at former Washington and Seattle player Paul Richardson. He's kind of built like Paul Richardson in that regard, or Deshaun Jackson, current veteran there. Excellent quickness, really good long speed. He tracks the ball well over his shoulder and over his head. He really plucks it well with his hands. And if you don't jam him, he's going to be gone. He's going to run by you. And he has some decent release footwork. He just needs a little more experience and tools to beat press. And he's going to have to be really good at anticipating and really studying defenders because of that lack of size. He's going to have to beat them with finesse on a regular basis. There's some potential there with some of the hard breaks to drop your weight and break back to the ball. He's going to need a little more nuance there. But once he gets the ball in that open field, great change of direction skill, and he's not shy about working in the middle of the field in some of these tighter zones. And while I love his running and I love his ability to play to the ball at, 172 pounds, maybe he'll be closer to 180, 185 at some point, but you still have to be concerned about his ability to hold up. He's not a real physical player. I've seen him in games where he literally slides, as a return specialist to avoid contact, or leans away from contact, or drops to the ground as soon as he catches the ball. And, Torrey Holt used to just kind of get down, as a Rams receiver in the middle of the field, and had a great career, moving the chains doing that. But you want to see a guy who, if you're worried about his ability to hold up, you also want to see him, whether you want him playing smart and doing that, fine, or you want to make sure that he can just stay healthy and it's not interfering with his ability to actually make plays. So I have some concerns about that in ball security, but he's a big play weapon in waiting. And Sean Bradley, he's got good body control. He sheds blockers, avoids them altogether. But he's probably at his best dodging rather than shedding, just because he doesn't have really that muscle in the lower body to really kind of work through that contact. He can get engulfed. But he's going to have to really process better as a run defender at this point. So you can see he's probably more of a special teamer at this stage. Watkins is a guy that I actually like probably a little bit more than Hightower, just because of the fact that I think he's a little bit sturdier. He has that long speed, maybe not as great short area quickness as Hightower does to be able to bend. He doesn't really bend as well as Hightower, but he's a really sturdy guy in terms of being able to win against tight and physical coverage, and he can run after the catch. He's just more of a guy that you give him an in-breaking route, and he doesn't have to turn, to face his man and try and beat him. If he can just catch it and pierce it upfield, he can be really effective. So he's an intriguing guy who'll help on special teams, as well as what he can do for you, being able to catch a ball in one-on-one situations.
Last two picks, Matt, were Prince Tega Wanagu, who's got an interesting backstory, the tackle from Auburn, and Casey Toohill, who's an edge rusher from Stanford.
Yeah, Wanagu is, he's a fluid athlete. He's quick. He plays with physical and mental stamina. He has that length you're looking for at the tackle position, and he can get downfield and attack at that second and third level and engulf guys in the run game. Really high effort, play to the whistle type of guy. He can take a punch from a power rush and still deliver some pop when he attacks. And because he's fluid as an athlete, even with the hips, there's room for him to improve his power physically and technique-wise. So this is a guy that I think has really nice upside, but technically he just has a lot of work to do in terms of focusing where his hands need to be, delivering with a tighter area to the defender's frame. He can play a little too much from his heels, so he's going to lose balance against contact in the passing game because he's just not setting well or squaring his opponents. And he just has to have a little bit more knowledge of leverage. And he plays a little slower than his athletic ability just because of that. I think that technique refinement needs to be there. But I think it's, the fact that the Eagles took a chance on him, I think they feel like he can learn fast enough, and maybe he'll see the field, within a period of time, during that first contract, that he can be a contributor. But he's going to have to learn fast. And that's the type of thing that if he can do that, then, they've got themselves a really nice athlete to grow with.
Let's get to the Washington Redskins, Matt. We talked about their first-round pick, of course, Chase Young, kind of a no-brainer there. They didn't have a second-rounder. Their third and fourth rounders, Antonio Gibson, the wide receiver from Memphis, although is he a wide receiver? We'll figure that out. Sadiq Charles, a tackle from LSU, and Antonio Gandy Golden, a wide receiver from Liberty. Those were their third and fourth round picks.
Yeah, Gibson, it looks like he's going to start off in the running back room. And I've kind of gone back and forth on Gibson on how they're going to use him. And you guys got to remember that Washington, they have, Adrian Peterson, who's basically, he and Frank Gore are basically still chugging along and making younger guys, say that maybe the old days are still a little bit better, than what they anticipated it to be, because those are some physical players. But then you have Darius Geis, who, Doug Williams said recently, we really love him. We love his, we love his personality. We love his game, but he's a bit of a knucklehead. And, when you start having your a guy like Doug Williams say that he's a bit of a knucklehead, but even in a nice way, that tells you that maybe there's something going on, maybe with his reliability as a professional. I don't know for sure, but that's usually a little bit of an indicator. And so when they bring in a guy like Gibson, who has the size of a big back, who has that great, speed, 4.3 type of speed, can help you in the return game, catches the ball well out of the backfield, as well as a slot receiver or an outside receiver who can run some of those, in breaking and timing routes with hard breaks and do it well. You look at what Gibson does well, and it's really the gap game, man blocking, and they do a good bit of that in Washington. You guy like Chase Roulier, who's a really nice pulling center, and they have some assets on the line even without Trent Williams when these guys can stay healthy. That's been the biggest issue for Washington, is keeping that line healthy. But Gibson is someone that could really develop back fast as a running back and maybe push Darius Geis a bit. And if they feel like Geis isn't a guy that they can rely on long term for that second contract, and when Adrian Peterson finally decides to retire at age 52, maybe they'll have a guy like Gibson who can come in and actually deliver at a level that can be a really strong pro game. I think the cutting ability, the vision's there. The zone skills are maybe needing a little bit more work for him. Charles, he's mobile. As a tackle, he has excellent redirect and mirroring with his opponents. Using him as a guy to pull or kick out, and I think he does so with a lot of good range, and that's important on some of those toss plays for guys like Gibson to take advantage of that athletic ability. And what Adrian Peterson does really well, he runs toss as well as anybody in the league still, and he just has to get longer so he can maintain his blocks. He seems to lose interactions after initial contact. But there's potential for Charles to really develop with a year of training and work on his placement, timing, balance, and core strength. And if you can work on those things, I think you get yourself a starting tackle. And then with Gandy Golden, we've talked about this guy a lot. Big, strong, great at the catch point, very hard to tackle. You usually need two guys in the secondary to bring this guy down. Doesn't have great speed necessarily in terms of timed speed, but you see him often winning in the vertical game at the level that he was at, and you have to understand that a place like Liberty, maybe if he was at a place like a Big Ten school or an ACC or SEC school, the training programs that you have there are a little bit better in terms of being able to develop guys to win to the test in terms of the workouts. But I think also, he doesn't have a lot of moves off of the line of scrimmage, but the moves he uses, he wins with. Watching him at the Senior Bowl, it just kind of made me laugh, because you see a lot of guys who will use a lot of different moves and show off all the different things that they can do. And Gandy Golden's kind of like the guy that's like, I have a hammer and a wrench, and I'm gonna show you how I can win with those pretty much every rep. And he does that. So as he gains more skills, and he's a smart guy, I think he can challenge for a contributing role this year and maybe even start down the line.
Let's get to their 5th rounders and 7th rounders. They had 4 more picks. Keith Ishmael, a center from San Diego State. Kalique Hudson, outside linebacker, Michigan. Cameron Curl, a safety from Arkansas. And James Smith Williams, DN from NC State. The guy I'm most familiar with there, Matt, Kalique Hudson from Michigan. He had a terrific career. He's actually from Western PA, McKeesport High School. Went to Michigan as a safety. He made a lot of tackles and a lot of plays for them over the years. Curious to get your thoughts on him. He seems like, at a minimum, a guy that could be a core special teamer, and then get your thoughts on the other guys as well.
Sure. And Hudson's that guy that, he has some real skill as a box player. Like you said, he's a tackler, physical man-to-man. I think he has enough athletic ability to handle tight ends, but he may not be quite the athlete at the caliber to where you're going to ask him to play safety in the deeper ranges of the field. And that's why I think he's been asked to play linebacker maybe. I think that's what they want to do with him. But it's going to mean that he's going to have to get better at gap discipline and gap strength and holding up, and shedding defenders there. So he's probably more of a prospect at linebacker. but that may be better for for Washington, looking at him in that regard, than feeling like that they want him to be a safety where he might be physically mismatched a little bit more often than you'd like to see. With Ismail, this is a guy who's played center and guard. He committed very few penalties during his career, so he's a very disciplined guy. Only allowed 3 sacks by those that I've seen, services that have graded him. He's quick, he's explosive, has a hard punch. He's a lacrosse athlete, so he's pretty fluid in the way that he moves laterally as well as getting downhill. He redirects well, and he's someone that keeps his head on a swivel. He's quick enough at the second level. There's some evidence of him being able to use his hands independently as a blocker. I wish I could have seen a little bit more of that than what I did, but some of it was enough there that it's notable. Right now he's at his best in the ground game where he can dig in, but this is a nice player. I like that. I like where they got him. And then with Curl, he's a good tackler. I think he's going to get a shot on special teams. His mobility to cover in the NFL is something that they're going to have to develop. He adjusts well to the ball, but he doesn't necessarily change direction as well as you'd like to see, and that can hurt him if they need to use him in coverage. Smith Williams, powerful edge defender, good length, out of NC State, who can work speed to power as a rusher. He has really good leverage. He's a good athlete, but he's going to have to develop a little get better gap discipline and play with discipline overall. He's got to keep his eyes on the prize and not get distracted by a lot of different things happening on the field. So if he can stay disciplined with that role and focus, and that may help him be able to play to one side of his assignment as opposed to getting engulfed by the man. And if that happens, he has a little bit better of a chance to be a defender on the field and make more plays. Not real bendy though, and he has an injury history. I mean, he's had 3 seasons that he couldn't finish, including a foot injury that he had that cost him, I think, 5 games this year. So good athlete. We'll see if he can develop into something a little bit more. But at this range of the draft, you take chances on that.
I don't know many other people that did this, Matt. We went through every single draft pick for every team. You can go back and listen to your team and Matt's thoughts and every division, every team within your division over the last 8 weeks. Next week, as mentioned, we're going to do something a little bit different, diving into tracking football. It's fascinating. They have all of the official track numbers for all of the prospects over the years, all the guys that are in the NFL right now, and they'll tell us about the correlations that they have found. I know NFL teams, much like they subscribe to the rookie scouting portfolio from Matt, they also subscribe to tracking football. So looking forward to that. Then we will dive into some of the skill guys heading into the 2020 college football season before we do a conference-by-conference breakdown before hopefully there is a college football season. Other than that, check him out at Matt Wallman on Twitter. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL or at Ross Tucker Pod. The keg is kicked. We're all tapped out.
Thanks for listening to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Fantasy Feast, Even Money, Business of Sports, and College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, rosstucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.